Hey, it's Mike here, and today my response to the Carnivore Couple's 4-month Bloodwork results. And I will say they seem to be really nice, well-meaning people. They're trying to take their health into their own hands, but they're doing their own research, which in that community generally means being fed misinformation that goes against not just the scientific consensus, but the best data that we have.
Am I gonna die of a heart attack? Let's check my blood work and find out.
These low carb or carnivore experts essentially set these misinformation traps online that people can go down these rabbit holes with. And previously with Jenny, her LDL was really high. She explained it away with large fluffy LDL. We had the woman who had the stroke and how she explained it away and how LDL didn't matter based off the carnivore cardiologist. But this time we have a concept that I have not discussed before on this channel, and that is remnant cholesterol, that their levels being lower will save them. So let's just investigate this because I do think it is a really interesting topic as well. There's a lot to learn about it and research to look at, so let's go. Pat and Caitlin are the Carnivore Couple, and this is the video I'm responding to. Is it safe? Carnivore Diet 4-month Bloodwork results.
Hey y'all, welcome back to our channel. We're the Carnivore Couple. I'm Pat.
And I'm Caitlin.
And thanks to the person who sent that to me.
And I went to the doctor recently for the first time in like 13 years.
Yeah.
So Pat, after losing some weight, gained the confidence to go to the doctor without feeling as judged. And I feel bad because, again, these people are so nice and they are excited because they lost weight. But it's like, again, you could lose weight on a heroin-based diet. So we have to look at all of the factors.
My total cholesterol was 270. My HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol, was 52.
Which is a normal,
good range. Mm-hmm. But my LDL cholesterol was 207. And that's considered very, very high, like really, really high. And
yeah, his LDL was a whopping 207, which is over twice the optimal range by conventional standards, nearly 3 times that by more stringent standards. It's like 4 times my level. Yeah.
Upon seeing that number, my doctor actually recommended that I be put on statins. And I refused.
His doctor told him go on statins. He didn't want to do that. And then, of course, they did their own research. Caitlin, in particular, went and looked at some studies. And that just brings us to the topic of LDL denial.
So I really had to dive in a whole lot more. And one of the studies I found showed that an elevated LDL does not seem to be the greatest predictor of heart attack and stroke risk. And so this study came from, I believe it was 2009 from UCLA. And they analyzed data of over 136,000 patients who were hospitalized from heart attacks, and then they had their blood drawn. And what they found was crazy. Nearly 75% of patients hospitalized for a heart attack had cholesterol levels that would indicate they were not at risk for cardiovascular events based on the current cholesterol guidelines. How crazy is that?
I'm going to be honest, this is a wild interpretation from a study whose conclusion is diametrically opposed to what they're saying. Directly from the conclusion, quote, "These findings may provide further support for recent guideline revisions with even lower LDL goals." Yeah, public health organizations often set cutoffs that they think are achievable for people, and that's likely part of why they chose 100 for that LDL or bad cholesterol cutoff instead of, say, 70, which we'll get into why is better later. But yeah, they're like, lower's better. They're not saying LDL levels don't matter, but I just have to throw in a quick reminder that from the European Society of Cardiology, higher LDL is causal to atherosclerosis, the plaque in our arteries. And additionally, from this chart, we have very high quality Mendelian or genetically randomized studies where, the difference is that someone has higher LDL due to genes and they have higher heart disease risk. And then Caitlin says, well, looking further is where I found this idea of remnant cholesterol.
And so that's when I came across this idea of remnant cholesterol. Have you ever even heard of remnant cholesterol?
Never heard of it, so we started doing research after my blood work.
I just had to be reassured you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I will say right off the bat, I have a feeling she found it through low carb channels, because you Google remnant cholesterol and it autofills Dave Feldman, who is a low carber, and he has a whole article on it, partially dismissing LDL. He says things like, at minimum, one should be looking at remnant cholesterol over LDL cholesterol, though he seems to still be concerned a bit about LDL. Anyway, she's clearly using remnant cholesterol as an excuse to throw out concerns about LDL cholesterol. So what is remnant cholesterol? From this paper, quote, remnant cholesterol corresponds to the cholesterol not encompassed by HDL, classically good cholesterol, and LDL, or bad cholesterol, such as cholesterol associated with very low density lipoprotein, VLDL, and intermediate density lipoprotein, IDL, in the fasting state, as well as chylomicron remnants in the non-fasting state. Getting a little complex here, but in general, these are triglyceride heavy particles, which brings me to the equation for cholesterol itself, because we're really estimating most of these things. Well, you're measuring total cholesterol in the lab, and then they're also measuring HDL as well as triglycerides, and then they're estimating LDL, you're estimating remnant cholesterol. And so if you're familiar with the cholesterol equation, for total cholesterol, it is actually HDL plus LDL plus triglycerides times 0.2, or 1/5 of your total triglyceride level. And again, that LDL is estimated, but we've seen from studies showing that's a very accurate estimation. However, you might be thinking, isn't remnant cholesterol just the same as triglycerides? It's just a proportion of triglycerides. And yeah, in the case for all these blood panels in general, yes. And triglycerides are associated with increased heart disease, so it makes sense that remnant cholesterol would be as well. We'll get more into the causal aspects later. But yeah, his triglycerides are 55 and his remnant cholesterol is just 11, 1/5 of that. Now that you have that background, what makes her so confident that a lower remnant cholesterol would just cancel out wildly high LDL? Here she is.
One of the most current research studies we could find was published in 2021, and this came from Johns Hopkins Hospital, that showed that remnant cholesterol may be a better predictor of heart attack and stroke risk regardless of that LDL.
She mentions a study from Johns Hopkins that looked at 17,000 people, not huge for an epidemiological study, but worth checking out. And to be fair with that wording, one might interpret that infinitely high LDL is just completely canceled out by low remnant cholesterol. However, the very next sentence highlights the main finding that, in fact, the researchers say a remnant cholesterol measure may detect the potential for disease when LDL levels do not. So that's where the real finding for this is, when you have like low LDL levels for whatever reason. Maybe somebody's on statins, which don't always lower remnant cholesterol, but can depending on the statin, and they're having high remnant cholesterol for whatever reason, and that can increase risk. So does the head researcher that literally performed the study say LDL sucks and should be thrown away? No, they say, quote, our analysis suggests that LDL should remain an important assessment tool. They just say that remnant cholesterol can find some risk on its own. And this video is sponsored by Seeds DS01 Daily Synbiotic, which is a prebiotic and a probiotic together. And in this case, one of these little capsules has 53.6 billion active bacterial cell units from 24 different strains, which are scientifically shown to support various areas of health, such as digestive health, gut barrier integrity, gut immune axis, cardiovascular health, skin health, and a new one, gut microbial balance. I've talked a lot about dysbiosis in these segments, just the imbalance of gut bacteria. You can have one pathogenic one get out of whack, not enough good ones. This study, for example, looked at one of the strains in seed and found that, yeah, it was effective at decreasing the amount of various E. coli strains. Of course, E. coli is a pathogen from poop. And we also have this very interesting one looking also at a strain in seed and evidence that it could help with Parkinson's disease. Well, it was just a petri dish study. They found that these probiotics exert promising effects by decreasing pro-inflammatory cytokines, oxidative stress, and potentially pathogenic bacterial overgrowth, keeping those bad boys in check. And Lindy and I have been taking seed since 2021 and loving it. Gonna keep going hard into the seed for those benefits. And of course, if you would like to try seed, you can click the link below and use the code Mike at checkout for 25% off your first month's supply. All right. And this study did look at what are considered discordant situations here, where we have the remnant cholesterol high, LDL low, or remnant cholesterol low, LDL high, because in general, they're usually in step with each other. As one goes up, the other one goes up. But with Pat, who's slamming down saturated animal fat, but is probably in a calorie deficit and not eating any sugar, the LDL is going to shoot up. And then again, because of weight loss, not having an excess in calories, which boosts triglycerides. His triglycerides are low. And yeah, the study did look at higher LDL and lower remnant cholesterol people, but the cutoff for that was 130, which is 77 points lower than Pat is. That being said, that group with the lower remnant cholesterol and high LDL did better than the group with high both. However, in model 1, where there was a ton of things adjusted for, there was still about a 30% increase compared to baseline for cardiovascular disease. It still stands that the more LDL in one's bloodstream, the higher chance of oxidization, the higher chance of these LDL particles penetrating the artery wall. And there is another study that is way bigger, about 100,000 people, which illustrates that you just can't rely on remnant cholesterol alone, especially if LDL is high. They looked at people who were admitted to the hospital with acute coronary syndrome, which from the Mayo Clinic is most often caused by plaque rupture or clot formation in the heart arteries. And yeah, about 40% of people in the study were admitted for heart attacks, for example. In terms of cholesterol levels for those that were admitted, again, for these heart emergencies, 84% of these people had an LDL over 70, which is what I consider ideal, but only about 20% had a remnant cholesterol over the cutoff that the study used, meaning high. And again, the idea that remnant cholesterol isn't some get out of heart disease free card can be seen from figure 1 here. His remnant cholesterol was about 0.30 millimoles, which is this column here, right in the middle of the pack, with about 10,000 people admitted, over half as many as were in the study she cited, so not immune there. And I do think there's a bit of hypocrisy in denying that LDL particles can cause heart disease, but then these other like VLDL particles, those are absolutely horrible and do cause it. And really quick, I thought it would be nice to do a look at where this remnant cholesterol is actually coming from in the body and how that works. And this graphic from a study really demonstrates it well. On the left side, you have the dietary fat being turned into chylomicrons, which are mostly carrying triglycerides, like 97% triglycerides. They're bringing that to the liver. And then the progression starts. The liver makes VLDL, again, carrying mostly triglycerides. Once it drops those, it shrinks to that IDL, intermediate density lipoprotein, and then finally that LDL, which is smaller and can, of course, get caught in those arteries. And this is where we need to remember that he had his fasting levels checked. He obviously didn't have his postprandial or after meal levels checked of any of this stuff. From the Encyclopedia of Human Nutrition, diets very high in saturated fat, his diet, have been associated with increased postprandial chylomicrons and chylomicron remnants compared to diets rich in polyunsaturated fats. This makes sense. These are transporting fat, but that wouldn't show up in a fasting estimate at all. So if you're afraid of remnant cholesterol, you have to be concerned about that. And going back to Feldman's article, I think there's a pretty strong point for why LDL is still such a threat. He talks about the amount of time that these different particles are in your bloodstream, and you can see that these remnant cholesterol particles are, only in there for, less than 2 hours, less than half an hour, but then that LDL, that bad cholesterol, is in there for 2 to 4 days. Like, which one is going to be doing more damage? And just a quick note on that cutoff for an LDL of 70, I always think it's good to look at this chart because you can see in terms of atherosclerosis sites and LDL level that, like everybody over that is having atherosclerotic buildup over time, but people below it are generally okay. But there's a bigger point I want to touch on before moving on, and that is just, if the concern is safety here, you should be looking at studies on mortality for the type of diet that is being eaten. And in this case, meta-analysis after meta-analysis show that low-carb diets are associated with about 30% increased all-cause mortality, which is not good. And these are people who, based on what they're eating, would have high LDL, but lower triglycerides, probably with no sugar, and maybe even lower remnant cholesterol. But we're seeing that, faster death rate. We have those really good meta-analyses, but I wanted to present something newer. It's not out yet. yet, but there was a study presented to the American College of Cardiology that looked at low-carb diets and cardiovascular events in particular, finding that low-carb, high-fat dieters had more than 2 times the risk of having several major cardiovascular events such as blockages in the arteries, stents, heart attack, stroke, etc. And then I would just have to say really quickly, of course, you can have low LDL and low remnant cholesterol on a vegan diet, for example. Obviously, my LDL is really low, and my remnant cholesterol is really low at 16, so you can be low in both.
There's the reasons why. If anyone hasn't looked up Dr. Philip Ovadia, he is a heart surgeon who's been doing heart surgeries for 20 years.
They also follow a carnivore cardiologist, of course, and they say, in his practice, anecdotally, he's found that LDL doesn't really matter as much as insulin resistance.
Carnivore is big in the carnivore community.
Yeah.
And his personal observational experience in those 20 years has seen that people that are more insulin resistant have a higher risk of heart disease. So he's seen people with low LDL but are more insulin resistant, more so on his operating table than people with high LDL with everything else looking good.
And if we're talking anecdotes, here's an anecdote of a guy who went on a carnivore diet and he had a heart attack. And then over the next year, his right coronary artery went from a 10% blockage to a 90% blockage. He had a second heart attack and then, he quit. There's an anecdote.
He actually lost 100 pounds. He was morbidly obese, went on carnivore diet and lost all this weight. His LDL cholesterol is actually between 200 and 300 as well, but everything else is great. And he's over 40.
And that's the key.
That's the key.
Everything else is normal.
Exactly.
Yeah, Jimmy's a really normal boy. He walks normally. He talks normally. His main hobby is killing pigeons and stringing them into a necklace and walking around the neighborhood. But other than that, he's completely healthy and normal. I'm just saying that high of an LDL is still a really big red flag. And the fact that this cardiologist has an LDL, bad cholesterol, between 200 and 300 as well, oh my gosh, it's not okay. And I should just mention what I mentioned in the video on the woman who had a stroke on a carnivore diet, saying her carnivore cardiologist knew everything. Well, again, papers like this one call for cardiologists to have more nutritional training because they are simply not qualified to counsel on diet based on their education. He also mentioned that his testosterone was much lower on the normal end.
My testosterone was low, a little low. The total was 252. And the doctor did say that I'm still considered obese. So when you have extra weight and extra fat on your body, it can also translate to low testosterone in men. So the more weight I lose, the more fat I burn, and the more muscle I build, the higher my testosterone should go.
But, he believes his doctor in that statement, but not necessarily in the other statements. I think that's interesting. So I just have to mention, vegans on average have equivalent free testosterone and higher total testosterone. So you don't need to be eating this much meat to be a man. In this case, somebody is eating so much meat and still having lower testosterone. And researchers have been searching for an answer to the question, why is it that some people, especially on statins with lower LDL, can still get heart attack and stroke? This paper mentions that despite every 40 milligrams of LDL lowering with statins leading to 25% less cardiovascular events and 10% less death, we still have those heart attacks. I would say a lot of that could be due to just having a lifetime of inflammation and artery clogging before going on statins, but that is where they say remnant cholesterol comes in, because remnant cholesterol can often be about 1/3 of your total cholesterol. So is it itself actually doing damage? And the answer appears to be yes. Studies across the board show that higher levels are worse for cardiovascular disease. Is it just an association? Well, quote, Mendelian randomized studies, those genetic ones as well, have firmly confirmed a causal contribution of remnant cholesterol to heart attacks and ischemic heart disease. And I will say the actual cutoff for remnant cholesterol where it's high is really debated. That previous study I mentioned was a cutoff of 38. There are other ones with a cutoff of 30, like this one. They say that for heart attack and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, compared to the lowest for individuals with the highest tertile of remnant cholesterol, we see a pretty bad increase, 60 and 40%. Did you say the highest tertile? Because I believe that I am the highest tertile. Lesson of the day, tertiles aren't the slowest, they're just the fastest at being slow. Back to it, man. And one study even found negative effects with a cutoff of 24, however, just sliced it down the middle. And in terms of what could be the causal mechanism from this 2023 review, on remnant cholesterol. Quote, remnant cholesterol plays a critical role in promoting the formation and development of atherosclerosis through adhesion and pro-inflammatory effects, leading to the occurrence of related diseases. And I will say, to lower remnant cholesterol, they actually recommend substituting animal fat with unsaturated fat. Also, both LDL cholesterol and remnant cholesterol containing particles enter the arterial wall, which is huge. In the end, these people are trying to be healthy. I want them to have a low cardiovascular disease risk, but it again appears that they've been following low carb information channels and they believe that a lower remnant cholesterol is just going to cancel out, exorbitantly high LDL cholesterol. But as you've seen, that's not the case. And I understand, this guy's excited, he's lost some weight, but again, you don't have to be on an all meat diet to lose weight. The Broad study is a great example of a plant-based diet, which led to, unprecedented weight loss without calorie restriction or added exercise. And of course, we're going to see lowered insulin resistance. We see people reversing their diabetes on a plant-based diet all the time. And you can have that low LDL and that low remnant cholesterol. Why not have both? And finally, of course, a carnivore diet is horrendous for the planet. I've calculated that in several videos. It's horrible for biodiversity loss and carbon emissions. We're talking like 20 times worse than a plant-based diet. And then it's fair to say that it's the worst diet you can have in terms of animal impact. And I would really like to see less animals killed, please. And if you would like to try Seed, click the link below for 25% off your first month's supply. And of course, feel free to let me know down below if I missed any remnant cholesterol points or interesting cholesterol points or anything about their story, that I didn't pick up on. And of course, feel free to like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.